Welcome back, everybody. We are talking about scholarship money. Who doesn't want to talk about scholarship money? And I have with me my colleague, who also happens to be a former financial aid officer at Emerson, Elms, and Mount Holyoke colleges, and was a VP of Education, Finance, and Student Loans at JP Morgan Chase. Hi, Stacy. It's Stacy McFeeters.
Hi, Beth. How are you? Good to see
Good.
you.
Nice to see you as well. We're talking about one of our favorite subjects today, and that is asking for more money. It's not necessarily a fun thing to do, but the end result, if it turns out the way you want it to, is wonderful, because what it can do is open up opportunities to attend a school that perhaps was a little bit out of reach, but now with just a little bit more money could be within reach. I think a lot of our listeners aren't even aware that you could ask for more when you're given scholarship dollars. And so we wanted to talk about that today, mostly to share how to go about that in the right way, because if you do it in the wrong way, you're probably not going to get more, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Although one thing I will say is that they're not going to take money away from you unless you really are just asking. They won't take it away.
Correct.
But if you don't act in the right way, they may not give you more. All right. Our first bullet point was, can you ask for more money? So tell us a little bit about why that's really an okay thing to do.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. It's funny. I refer to this as the most wonderful time of the year in college finance because by and large, it's not a fun process.
No.
So when asking the question, can you negotiate for higher merit scholarships? The answer is you can try. Absolutely. And in fact, we always encourage folks to try. The reality is schools have an amount of money that they make available. They give it to the students that they desire the most. Obviously, that's the process of awarding merit scholarships. Although, as a parent, I'd love to believe that they're going to give my student money just because she's fabulous. It's probably more likely because they want her to enroll. So the short answer is yes, you absolutely can negotiate for higher merit scholarships.
Right. And is it the same thing as when you're asking for more financial aid?
It's really not.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is we want to differentiate between need-based financial aid that is awarded to you as a part of your having completed the FAFSA versus the money that's coming from directly from admissions as sort of a part of the acceptance process. Recognizing that you will see that merit scholarship in your financial aid offer, know that they're actually quite separate and distinct. I know we're going to talk about appealing for additional financial aid under special circumstances separately. So today, let's focus only on that money that's awarded as a part of the admission process.
Okay. So with that in mind, you just mentioned that this is money that admissions is often awarding, right? So is that who you should go to, or is it still the financial aid person? Where do you start when you're going to ask for more money?
That's a great question. So realistically, if you were talking about a merit only, the only thing you're questioning or the only thing you're requesting is merit, you would definitely go back to the admissions office that made that particular offer. Now, I don't want to confuse matters, but if it is something that you're reaching out to both admission and financial aid because there's some appeal grounds as well, there's nothing wrong with doing both. But if we're strictly talking about merit, you would definitely reach out directly to the admissions office. Now, that's the starting point. We often get questions, who exactly should I be dealing with? And there's a lot of answers to that question, but the first answer that I always give is if your student has established a rapport or relationship with an admission counselor or an assistant director or whatever it might be called at that particular school who's handling their application, that's the person they should start with first. That person may tell them, I don't handle this, you need to go directly to the committee or to the director, then certainly you would pass that information forward. The reason you want to start with somebody who may or may not have, or who may have been a part of the student's application is they may or may not be given the opportunity to advocate for that student in additional money. So it's just sort of the first place to start. In the absence of that, you just go directly, usually to the director of admission. Often we encourage you to start maybe with a phone call, but do know that more times than not, you're going to be asked to follow up with something in writing.
Okay. And, one point I wanted to make a little bit earlier, not to completely interrupt the flow here, but we talk about this money, it's called scholarship money. A very good friend of mine whose daughter is applying to college this year, she's a senior, texted me and probably about a month ago because her daughter was getting acceptances and she was so shocked because she was getting scholarship money. And she's like, this is so amazing. why are they giving us scholarship money? And, you know, her daughter is lovely and wonderful and has earned every bit of this recognition. But I did sort of say to her, because she's a close friend, and I was like, really what they're doing is they're discounting their price,
100%.
right? It
Mhm.
sounds fancy. It sounds really exciting, like,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, a great scholarship. But what they're really doing is saying, we think you'll come if we knock 10% off of our price or whatever it is. And that's essentially what they're doing, right? So, which is why you can kind of ask for a deeper discount in some cases.
So, yes. I mean, the short answer to that question is yes. There's a lot of layers and nuances to it. So when families think about scholarship dollars, just know that they're never going to hand you any money. They're going to reduce your price
Yes.
by that amount. A really interesting way to think about it is leveraging the dollars that they have for the students they want for whatever reason that might be. Kind
Right.
of exactly what you said, but in a different way. So let me kind of give an illustration. Um, you know, folks probably remember that you and I both have juniors,
Mhm.
and we, of course, are looking at schools where our students might qualify for some type of merit scholarship. So, in doing that, we're looking for those schools who might be looking for our kids. So, what does that
Yes.
mean? Well, it could mean, I won't say in my case, it could mean that perhaps the student is extraordinarily talented in performing arts and sciences. And they might qualify for some merit based on talent, or
Mhm.
maybe they're applying to schools that are looking for some sort of diversity. So, for example, maybe one of our kids is going to apply to Montana, and not a lot of kids from Massachusetts apply for
Right.
Montana.
Yes.
So, do know that while it's a scholarship, and certainly be proud of your kids for helping reduce your overall cost, know that schools are using it in very strategic ways to lure the students that they think are going to come.
Right. I think it's a great point. And I would also like our listeners to know that Stacy and I literally had this conversation yesterday
Yesterday.
about these colleges. And lest you think we've got this all, we could give great advice, but it's always a thing when you are going through it yourself with your own kid. And I've no doubt we come out the other side even better prepared to help families through this process and hopefully successful with our own kids. So, are there specific strategies you want to consider when asking for more, right? We've already talked about who do you go to and why, but when you're asking for those bigger discounts, what are some strategies that you suggest?
Yep, it's funny. You teed this up perfectly because we kind of had to talk about why schools give this money to really understand the best way to go through the process. So,
Mhm.
we've already said definitely go back and ask, but like any negotiation, you want to go in from a position of strength.
Mhm.
So, when you go into a car dealership to maybe trade in a car, you're going to sort of present your trade in as the best possible car. You want to do the exact same thing when you're negotiating with schools around merit. So, couple of things. It's really advantageous if you have a position of strength or leverage to bring to the table. So, what does that really look like? Well, generally, what that means is you are bringing an offer from a similar or competitive school or competing school to that school to say, wow, your competitor across town or wherever is offering us this. Would you be willing to reconsider your offer?
Mm.
Um, Position of strength is always the best point, is always the best position in a negotiation. So it's really important for you to recognize which schools are similar. You don't want to take so you've probably worked with us or heard from us before that we sort of categorize our schools in sort of that reach or challenge, the just right, the no problem. You're not going to tell a challenging school that you have an offer from no problem. They're
Right.
not going to care.
Right.
So what you want to do is you want to really leverage those schools that compete with one another to pit them against each other.
Right. And I this is different because in the Ivies there is no merit money. It is all based on financial aid. But if a student had a financial aid award from another Ivy or what Penn considered as a peer institution, so an MIT, a Stanford, whatever, and they brought that financial aid award that was perhaps a little bit better. Maybe it had a little bit more grant aid or, just it was better for the family. They would ask, is it possible? Could you come into line? That was the wording that we used, come into line with this offer. But if it came from a school that we didn't consider a peer institution, the response was no, we weren't going to change the makeup of the financial aid office offer, but we might if it was a peer institution, because our theory was that we all use similar formulas. And
Yep.
so we must have missed something. And so we would ask for a little bit more information and try our best to make it so they were choosing based on the school and not on the financial aid office. This is obviously a little bit different because we're talking about merit money here. How the heck do you know? Right? Because one person's reach is another person's safety is another person's
Right.
challenge. So how do you know who competitors are?
So there's a couple ways you can really kind of do some of that research. I think, there's a lot of often you sort of have gone through the process, and by the time you have offers, you have a sense of what your student safety, your students,
Mhm.
no problem schools were. So you start there. I think certainly you can do some research. Look at some of the websites that we've referred to before, maybe bigfuture.collegeboard.org, and look to see what the approval rates are at each of
Mhm.
these schools. If both schools are approving in the you know X percent, 45, 60, whatever percent, and they both show that they identify as somewhat competitive or whatever the
Mhm.
metric might be, that's a fairly decent jumping off point.
Yeah.
So that's something that you definitely want to take into consideration.
And you could also ask a college counselor at your
Yep.
school. The FIS guide also
Yep.
will often list, schools that are similar to this school. That's not a guarantee that they actually are competitors because in some cases it might be schools that are similar but less selective
Right.
or more selective. Excuse me, in those cases, those are some other ways, right, that
Yep.
you could try to figure that piece out.
Yep.
And worst case scenario, you bring an offer from a school that they don't consider a competitor and the school says, thanks very much, but no,
Yep.
right? Again,
Absolutely.
they're
Absolutely.
not going to adjust your offer just because you had the gall to ask for more. It's
Yep.
fine. And they may say no. What about timing? When should you be reaching out to these schools?
So this is a very interesting question, only because this is a very unusual time, and I don't think I need to tell anybody that. But realistically, most of the time, I probably would have suggested that folks wait until they have the majority of their offers or the offers they know they want to look at side by side
Mhm.
before approaching schools. I'm not 100% sure I would head in that direction this year. I definitely am not suggesting anybody wait to the last minute, only because schools have been through a lot in the last couple of years or last year. We know that in some cases, schools' finances are what they are. And when they have expended their funds, they've expended their funds.
Right.
So, I'm pretty confident this year in saying if you feel like you have the offers that you want to compare, or you know what, we haven't mentioned maybe not having other offers, just wanting to ask.
Yep.
I would say whenever you feel like you're ready, it's time to do it.
Mhm.
I would not suggest waiting to the last minute this year. What I would suggest is if you make your attempt, you go back to the schools and they might come back and say, we'll give you X, we'll give you Y, not at this time, or simply no. There's nothing that stops you from going back one more time a little bit later in the process. I just don't want to have folks lose the opportunity now because they want to sort of play the waiting game.
Mhm.
So it's not unusual for folks to go back more than once. There are some schools that might, let me give a sort of very specific. We might say, if you have your competing offers, go now.
Right.
But then you might also go back sort of beginning to mid-April because you know that we're looking at a May 1 deadline. And if the school's numbers aren't where they want them to be, they may take another look.
Right.
So that's another possibility. But this year, unlike other years, I'm suggesting, or our entire team is suggesting, if you're ready, then you should probably be prepared to get it together and submit those requests.
Got it. Here's another thing that I think about is, as a parent, you're going back, you're asking for more. Should it be kind of like the sky's the limit? Do you want to put a number on there of how much money you want? Um, is that helpful? Could that hurt you? What do you think?
So the answer that I always give to that question is be realistic. If
Mhm.
the school has given you $1,000 and another school has given you 25, the twain will not be met.
No, right.
So, be realistic. Know what your breaking or walk away point is. If you go back and ask for more, ask for a comparison, and the school gives you whatever they're willing to give you, and you're not willing to pay that, then you need to walk away.
Mhm.
Or certainly ask again. But, very often you can put a number out there. They're going to give what they're going to be willing to give. There are going to be metrics that they're still going to follow. It's not sort of an open blank checkbook. And again, it's not always successful. We have found in our history that we find that often we find about 40% of the schools will be willing to come back and reconsider, but they won't always reconsider at the dollar value that you've asked
Right.
for. So just
Right.
know that it could be some, it could be part, it could be none.
Well, one of the tips that I know we have talked about in the past is, let's say legitimately you have a school you would attend. If they would give you 2,000 more a year, that would be the difference maker. And that could be valuable information to share, right? So if
100%.
you give
Yep.
me that extra two, I'm signing and we're committing today. Maybe they would have only given you 1,500 and they're willing to add that another $500 on there.
Yep.
But just because you have laid it out and been very specific and shown that you really are interested, of course, don't do that and then not sign on the dotted line,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. So that's the other piece that I would, the sort of the last important piece of the conversation is what do you say and who says it? Right. So if you're going back, my advice is whoever will best advocate on behalf of your student should be the one having the conversation with the admission officer.
Mhm.
I would say that if the student is comfortable doing it and they have that rapport, they should be doing it.
Yeah.
If the student is going to walk in, stammer, say money, and walk out, then you can do it on their behalf. And
Right.
and by walk, I mean obviously the conversation. Um, you should also be very willing to sort of put down whatever your reality is. Don't be afraid to say, X school, you are absolutely my student's first choice. We need X.
Hmm.
Be very forthright, be polite. And then the other thing I would say that I think is probably goes without saying, give them some time. Most of these folks meet, will review and then meet in committee. It could be once a week, it could be once every 2 weeks. Submit your request, wait a measurable period of time. I usually say at least 2 weeks.
Hmm.
And then if you need to follow up, you can. But obviously do it all with, great respect. If the answer is no, the answer is no. And then you have to make your decision based on whatever information you have.
One last tip that I think I would throw out there is it's a phone call? Is it a letter? If it's a letter, is it a form letter or is it something more from the heart that's personal to you?
So it can start with a phone call. And sometimes it's easier to do that because then whomever you're working with, if it is somebody you have a rapport with, they might say, listen, this is exactly what you need to put in writing. Um, if it's a document, first check and make sure the admission office doesn't have something on their site that is a reconsideration of funds. Pretty rare. Then sort of the I would always suggest do it in writing. I would do it from the heart. If there are things you need them to know, something that has changed since the last time you've been in touch with them that may impact your scholarship, get it in there and then let them respond.
Awesome. Stacy, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for all my guests today for joining us. Next week, Ian is hosting, and actually, Sally's going to be there and Shannon is going to be there, and they're going to be discussing Jeffrey Salingo's book, Who Gets In and Why, A Year in College Admission. So don't miss it. And don't forget, we are here every week at 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific.